how is everyone? I am so excited to be here today and to talk to you guys. If you aren't familiar with who I am, my name is Teresa Stas, and I'm a sponsorship expert. I have an agency that's based out of Oregon and California, and we primarily broker and work with events all along the West Coast, but we do have events across the country that we also consult and work with as well. I also have an online course called sellsponsorships.com, and this course has been used in coursework for universities. It's also used by event professionals across the United States. And then really exciting is a couple of weeks ago, my book just came out, Sell Your Event, the easy to follow practical guide to getting sponsors. And so I'm really excited because this just came out. You can get it at Barnes & Noble's or Amazon or barnesandnoble.com, where where most books are sold. So anyway, you can pick it up. It also has a companion workbook that can help you out. But promise it's not a sales pitch. I only say this because I just want you guys to know that we come from a lot of experience. I have a lot of examples of things I'm going to share with you. And we work with all kinds of events, small events all the way to large events. So further ado, let's get started on how to build a sponsorship deck. So give me 1 second. I'm going to switch my screen over so that you are not just staring at me talking. Okay, so you should probably be able to hear me, and now you can see my visuals. All right, the introduction deck. It is the first visual connection that you're going to make between a prospect and your event. So it's important that we make a really big impact. And I first want to show you, before we get started, this graphic, and it showcases the entire sponsorship process. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that we are not discussing the entire process. That would take a lot longer. We are only discussing the part that says introduction, which comes right after prospect. So this is what you're going to send to a prospect as you start to decide who it is that you're trying to reach out to and get sponsorships from. So the introduction deck, it breaks down into 8 sections, and it's going to start first with the cover, the event overview, the quick event breakdown, important info about your event, demographic information, assets, optional inclusions, and then the wrap up. So I want to take a moment, and we're going to go over what a deck is. The introduction deck is a general presentation that you can send out to all your prospects. So it's a creative way to provide information on your event. It's like a deck of cards, and the pages of the presentation will work independently as well as together as a whole. So from the introduction deck, you can create a larger proposal based off of what the sponsor wants, saving you just so much more time in the future. And I want to make it clear that the introduction deck is not meant to act as a proposal. It is meant to act as an introduction to your event. So you want your prospect to learn about your event and then make sure that they appreciate it and can support your event before approaching them about sponsorships. Okay, so let's now talk about what I call one sheets or just level proposals, because many events, especially small events and sporting events, and then nonprofits, they find themselves using these kind of proposals. And this one was given to me, this example up here. Now, there's nothing wrong with this format, except that it's extremely limiting on what prospects it appeals to, which means that you're not going to make very much money when it comes to sponsorships. So if this is generating what you need out of it, and it seems to be working for you, then I'm not telling you to not do it. But if you're just not getting any money, this is probably not the way to go. We would not use this with any of our sponsors or our clients. So this is not one that we would use. But if you decide, or if you're not sure if you should use this, or if you've been using it and you're not sure if you should change formats, I want you to ask yourself 4 questions. So the first one is, are you a nonprofit? If you are not a nonprofit, do not use this, okay? If you're not a nonprofit, then you need to be creating proposals correctly, which is what we'll be working through, because they are expecting it of you. Number 2,
Are you selling sponsorships under $2,000? And if you're, if you're selling sponsorships under $2,000, if you're requesting sponsorship dollars that are like $100 to $1,000, then a one sheet might actually work just fine for you. All right. It may be sufficient enough. And to be really honest, those kinds of sponsorships are really more donations than your true sponsorship investments. All right. 3, is your attendance less than 1,000 people? Again, here, if your attendance is less than 1,000 people, if you only have a couple hundred people, you may not actually need an entire deck. It's not, I would still suggest doing it, but you could probably get away with doing something similar to this. And then number 4, is this event a fundraising event? If your event is a fundraising event, then that's another reason why you might use something like this, probably because you're using volunteers to hand out these packages. So you're trying to make it uniform and something that you can do. So I get that too. So evaluate these questions. If you're answering, let's say you're answering 3 yes to 3 out of 4 of these suggestions here, then I think you're fine using this kind of format. If you're saying no more than you're saying yes, then you really need to look at what we're going to be discussing today. So I want to share with you something that we did. We conducted a survey with sponsorship decision makers a few years ago from national and regional brands. So this was all before COVID, so just keep that in mind, so that we could get candid insight into what sponsors want. One of the things we asked is, assume you're learning about an event for the very first time and you are trying to gauge your interest in sponsoring that event. Please choose the 3 most important pieces of information that you can expect to see in the initial introduction deck. Now, these are what the sponsors are telling us that they expect to see when they first find out about an event. This is when they don't know anything about your event and you email them or you call them out of the blue and they say to you, give me some information about the event. So surprisingly, and if I was there live in person and I could interact with everybody, I would ask you guys to guess and everything. But surprisingly, the number 1 answer was demographics. If they don't know who your patron is, then they don't care about the rest of the information of your event, which quite frankly surprised me, to be honest. I thought they'd want to know about the event first. So what were the other answers? Well, of course, number 1 was demographics. Number 2 was event information. And then number 3 was your attendance numbers. So all 3 of these are the top 3 pieces of information, and all of these will be included, like I said, in the introduction deck. So let's talk about actually building this introduction deck. The first thing is going to be the cover. So it's very simple. It doesn't need to be anything super fancy. Here's a couple of examples of actual covers for events that we have worked with. And they include your event brand or title. They include your contact information. And I say this simply because some people do not include contact info on their decks. And I want to make it clear that there are going to be times when your email that you send it, or if you hand it to them, that the pages will be separated from the deck that you send. So if you send it as an email, you make it forwarded on, and so the contact information will no longer be with it if it's on an email. So make sure that you put it on the deck. You'll also want to make the design of your cover and your deck, you want to make it visually impactful. If you aren't much of a designer or don't have access to one, then my suggestion is to just go simple. I do highly suggest using a designer and create one that you can edit so that you can redo your deck for various projects. And I have found that the investment is totally worth it, especially since this is your first impression. But I will say that you can always use, programs like Canva. You can use, your PowerPoint presentations. We have we've used a group called Creative Market, where you can go online and people already create these kinds of things that you can buy templates off of. Even our online course has a template that you can get for free with it. So make sure that you're always sending as well. You're sending your files in PDFs always. And here's why I say this. It's because everybody looks at their stuff on mobile. most of the time. And if you send it as a Word document or a Google Word or through your iMac, things are going to look different. So you may have fonts that don't download correctly or spacing that doesn't translate, and it can just look plain weird. So what you want to do is make sure that you put it as a PDF. PDFs also make your file smaller, which will limit the chance of the file getting bounced back for being too big. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the event overview, which is page 2. And the event overview is a brief description about your event. This is what I want you to keep in mind when you're creating the event overview. So number 1, you're going to make it brief, no more than 1 page. Number 2, you're going to include photos if possible. Photos sell way better than words. Number 3, include exciting media accolades or record breakers. And the thing to keep in mind about this, it is very easy, especially when you've put in literally your blood, sweat, and tears into an event, to go into great detail about how amazing your event is, and then all the things that it did and how it was founded and the meaning behind the name and so on and so on. And I'm sure it's all great information. But what sponsors really want to know at this stage in the game is just what kind of media attention you're getting, what kind of achievements or success you've had. And really, they want to know about your audience, which we'll get to in a minute. And they also want to know anything exciting, things that will pique their interest, like celebrity involvements. They might want to know about examples that can be seen like on this slideshow, for instance. This event up here it's an acoustic concert summer series, and it's only has about 3,500 people that come to it, but it's had people like Taylor Swift, Blake Shelton, Toby Keith. These have all been people who performed there acoustically. Now, obviously they didn't do it when they were selling out arenas, but this event now has a reputation for playing the newest country artists that have turned into big superstars. So in this overview, they're creating excitement by showcasing that their sponsor could be tied to a big future name because they've had all these other artists that perform there. So if you have an event that sells out too, you might also want to include that here as well. You also want to talk about if your event is involved in a charity, if it's fundraising for a charity. Touch briefly on this, on what it is that they can what it is that you guys have done, and then also kind of what kind of money you've raised. That can be really important too. But if it's a lot, if you really do a big part about fundraising, if fundraising is the ultimate point of your event, then we want to put it in a different page, and I'll show you where to do that. Another selling point is when your event was established. So how long has your event been around? Brands are more likely to participate with established events. So if you're a newer event, let's say less than 5 years, then you don't necessarily need to include it on this page. But if you've been around more than 5 years, then I would definitely throw it. In this overview. Okay, so next we're gonna go take a look at the event breakdown. Now here's a few examples, and the purpose of the event breakdown is to list all the event stats easily readable in one spot. It is a snapshot of your event's basic information. So most of it could probably be found on your website, but you want to answer all the questions without them having to go hunt for them. So we want to keep them focused on your deck instead of leaving to go search for event information. So the information to include would be how many patrons or participants you plan on having at your event, and be honest, don't oversell yourself on this. You want to make sure that it's pretty consistent with what you've had in the past or what you're actually expecting. 2, how much are tickets, or what does it cost for a patron to participate? 3, where do people sign up to participate to buy these tickets? 4, how long has the event been around? We've talked about that before, but regardless if you're the first year event or not, this is where you want to put that. Number 5, who is producing the event? And number 6, and finally, what is the website and social handles for the event? So let's circle back real fast to who puts on the event. And the reason why I bring it up, because the person or company producing the event is not necessarily the one that will be hosting the event. And sometimes it's really hard to and confusing for sponsors because they don't know based off of the name who actually is producing it. So an example of this would be us, for example. So, we, a Green Cactus, we represent clients in their events, but we're not producing or even hosting the event. But oftentimes potential sponsors, sometimes if they don't know us, they think that we're handling the sponsorship sales. I'm sorry, they think that we're producing the event when we're actually just handling the sponsorship sales. So, but we're just brokers. So we want to make sure that you're including who's producing. Another example would be the nonprofit that produces an event, such as Sweet Home Economic Development Group, which is a nonprofit out of Sweet Home, Oregon, and it actually produces the Oregon Jamboree Music Festival. So nobody would actually know that. With a sponsor, a new sponsor wouldn't probably know that offhand. So you want to make sure that's clear. The festival, that festival has been around for about 26 years, and it's widely known, but most people don't realize that it's a little nonprofit group that's actually putting it on. That's actually putting it on. So you want to make it sure that you're getting clear on that part. Then you have your event website and social handles. So if you're still working on building your following and your likes, like maybe you don't have a ton of them, then go ahead and just include the handles in the website, but you don't have to highlight what your numbers look like. Now, if you have really great numbers, then you might even want to make that its own separate page. And I'll show you an example here in a minute of how you can do that. I also want to show you an example of how you might do a multiple event breakdown. Hood to Coast is an event that we work with, and they have several races throughout the year. And in their case, it makes more sense to sell the races as a package to sponsors. If you fall into the same category, then I suggest doing your event breakdown like this, unless you want to sell the events individually. Another example of this is an acoustic concert series like we talked about before. And we work with it, and it has 5 shows total. And instead of selling those shows individually, it makes more sense to sell them as a group. It helps with the attendance numbers and increases the visibility for the sponsors. So for events that you might want to sell as a group, but they're on different days or different locations, this is how I would suggest you showcasing them. Next is the important information to your event. So not everybody is going to need separate pages, but here's a couple of examples of information that might be important to include. So Hood to Coast, yet again, it generates a lot of money for Providence Cancer Research, and this is showcasing that charity fundraising aspect that is included. Another example of info may be a schedule like shown here. It's a series schedule for the acoustic concert series that I just mentioned. Okay, so time to include your demographic information. Now that we've talked about how important this is and how it's the lifeblood of selling your sponsorships, so here are some examples of how to showcase your demographic information. And I want to point out that the example on the right is for an event that hasn't happened yet. So if you're in a situation where you have a new event, then I would suggest doing what Hood to Coast here has done and providing projected demographics. Just because you haven't had an event doesn't mean that the sponsors don't want to know about the anticipated patron. So these demographics are based off of other races they've done, and the area that they're in, and there are also other events that are in that same category and those same areas. So what demographic do you want to include? Well, you want to make sure that you're including the male to female ratio, the age breakdown, the location of where your patrons are coming from. This is something to look into, because just because your event is held in one location doesn't mean that your patrons are coming from there. So an example of this, again, is the Oregon Jamboree that I've referenced. And they hold their festival in a town with a population of 8,000 people. But they have an attendance numbers of 10 to 15,000 people per day. So they're clearly not coming from the town of 8,000 people. They're coming from surrounding areas. And when you're going to pitch for sponsors, you want to pitch the areas that your patrons are coming from. So knowing where they're coming from will help your sponsors determine whether or not your audience is still their audience, even though it may not be the same location. So a real quick example of this is we had Cracker Barrel one time for this particular festival, and the Cracker Barrel location that had opened in Tualatin, Oregon, which was about an hour and 20 minutes from the event. So normally you would think, oh, well, that's too far. But for them, they knew that the majority of the people coming were coming from that particular, coming from that Tualatin area and going to the event. So they were targeting their local people, but they were targeting them in a different area. Okay, so you want to also know the household income, and that's important to a lot of people. Education, and then any info you can share. So if you can get other demographic information, then go ahead and include it. You can't include too much demographic information. And here are some tips that I have for collecting demographic information if you don't have it. Okay, so use your past ticket sales for zip code info to find out where your patrons are coming from. You can pull demographics from social media. Now, this is not foolproof, obviously, but it will give you a good sense of who at least is interested in your event and who is following your message. It may not tell you who is showing up at the event, but it will give you a good idea of your audience, especially if you don't have any demographics at all. This is a great place to start. You could go to Facebook Insights to pull analytics for the fans that you have. Other social medias also have the same capabilities for pulling analytics. Third-party integration platforms for ticketing. There are a few different ticketing platforms that can pull demographic information when people buy tickets or even connect to their social medias, which will then pull a lot of that same information that you're looking for. You can survey on site or at an event with prizes and giveaways. So you can set up a survey and then do your different questions, and then you can offer like some sort of incentive. So we have learned from experience that if you're going to do on-site surveys, you really should have some sort of incentive that will get you the most results. We also suggest maybe surveying online prior to the event. You can use experiences backstage, ticket upgrades, or you can do different kind of prizes. You can also send the survey out to those who have purchased tickets for your event and offer them a chance to win some sort of upgrade if they fill out the survey. Contact your local college or your business statistics class. Now, I personally have not used this one, but I know of some statistics classes that have done this for events before. So the demographic surveys are managed by students as part of a class project. Now, there is a charge for it, but you'll get a bigger, robust survey and a more in-depth one at a much lesser cost if you have a college who would participate in something like this. Next is to invest in a third-party company to pull your demographics for you. So a company that I've have some interaction experience with is Touch Pull South Florida. Obviously, that's probably too far for you guys, but I'm sure there are companies out there that are part of your association that would be perfect for something like this. So they'll actually come out to your event and do it for you. And if you don't know what to do or you have a lot going on, I mean, this is a great way to do it. Even if it's only for a few years, like every other year, or you wait a couple years in between, they have a really good understanding of what your demographics are. Okay, so some suggestions. If you do your own demographic research, so let's say you do this yourself, things that you want to keep in mind is make sure that your survey is 10 questions or less. We suggest only doing multiple choice so that you get a better chance of them actually filling it out. When you do a lot of open-ended questions, people tend not to be so much into it. Use platforms like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms to manage those surveys, and they'll generate really easy reports for you to read. Okay, so now what we need to include is the asset page. So in case you don't know what an asset is simply your event inventory. It's also been known as a benefit. So it's the item, the name, or the category that you're putting a price on. So for an example, a booth space at your event or a banner at your event may be considered an asset. So in this page, you're going to include your general asset list. If you don't have one, you should start working on one. You don't want to include the cost of the asset in your initial pitch unless you're specifically asked to do so. Don't send pricing or proposals until you've talked to a sponsor or have been asked to send one. Because when you do that, what you're saying is that you don't care what they want. So you want to talk to the sponsor first and find out the kinds of things that they want and how you can help them achieve those goals by putting together a proper proposal. So do not send proposals and do not send pricing when you're doing introductions. Okay. And if you have a lot of different assets, then you need to gauge what would be valuable to that prospect. So the examples shown here is an asset list for Hood to Coast, and they have a lot of assets, but they have managed to highlight the main ones and keep it to one page. So depending on who you're writing your deck for, who you're sending your intro deck to, you might adjust that list so that it will highlight things that you feel would be more enticing to your prospect. Okay, so you might also want to consider including some key extra information in your deck. And this really just depends on your event. So these are some examples of what other decks have included because they found that information to be important to the specific sponsor that they were trying to target. So Hood to Coast, again, here they included their web numbers. Like I mentioned before, they have really high web numbers. So they did their own sheet on that. This is because their numbers, like I said, are so high. They have really great web numbers and they have really great email numbers. So of course they want to showcase that to a perspective because it could be very important. Another example shown here is a page that was included into an intro deck that was being sent to a rideshare company. Now they were able to pull stats that 10% of their concert goers used rideshare companies. If they have specific information like that for a sponsor, then I would totally include that because it might help land a deal. So you might want to include your social or web numbers if they're high, or your email list numbers if they're high. You want to include information or stats that show that their customer are your patrons. Information that includes your marketing. If it's significant, a sponsor could be involved. So let's say you have a marketing plan and you can include logos or tags or things like that. And commercials, that kind of stuff is also important. Now, okay, so your last page, guys, we're on the last page, is going to be the easiest one that you have so far, and it's your wrap-up page. This is a good place to include photos of the event and information again, because you can't have it on there too many times if you ask me. I have some proposals that have the information on every single page. Now, we have just walked through the whole process of creating your intro deck. So let's just overview it really quick. So you're going to have your cover, then you're going to have your event overview, then you're going to have your quick event breakdown, then you're going to do the important information about your event if you need it. You'll have your demographic information, you'll have your asset sheet, your optional inclusions if you need those, and then of course your wrap up or your back cover. So that should be everything. And hopefully it makes a lot of sense. It's very well laid out. And then once you decide to go into the world of proposals, or you get asked to put one, then you can use these pieces as you need them and then just add the proposal stuff at the end. So you already have most of the proposal already handled for you. So I'm putting up my information up here on the screen. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out and email me, because I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you again, guys, so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm really hoping that you've gotten some valuable information out of this. And if you have questions, like I said, feel free to reach out to me with them. Thanks so much, guys.